Now apparently you can open booze bottles with this guy, but I can't seem to get it right. I must be doing something wrong. Don't drink and fly, guys, or as my friend Jack says, you will get yourself a DUI, which is droning under the influence. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, hold my beer, doesn't it? Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the all-new Emax Buzz. This is a 5-inch freestyle copter from Emax, and the name Buzz comes from the idea that after you have finished all of your flying and you have driven safely home, you can use your copter to open up a beer, and that is where Buzz comes from apparently. Now I'm going to take full credit for this because back in June of last year in my HLRC bind and fly video, I think I said, we've got enough of these bind and fly race copters, where are all the freestyle copters? In fact, let's fact check me right now. And what I want to put out there to these companies is that there is an abundance of 5-inch RTF race drones now, with the Hawk 5 and the Batman nailing it at the top end. And I think what we are missing now is some headlining freestyle models that get the props out of shot for the GoPro to compete with the reverbs and the aliens out there. So there you go, you are welcome, world. Of course, I'm not going to take credit for that, but it is a fact that there has been a flurry of bind and fly and plug and fly freestyle copters since I made that video, so I don't know, maybe I just was making a prediction. Anyways, at this point of the video, I feel that I always need to distinguish the difference between a freestyle copter like this and a race copter, because there'll be some people looking at this and thinking, oh, it's like we're going backwards, it's big and it's heavy and it's going to be slow, where we can have really lightweight race copters, and that is true. But the problem with race copters is that in order to get them so fast and light, you have to mount the battery underneath. You have to have a smaller core, so that's why the battery has to go underneath. And when you put a GoPro on the top of them, unless you have an extreme angle, you'll get the props in shot. Also, because they are lighter, they don't deal with prop wash oscillations as well as a heavier model. It's the difference between throwing a brick through the air and a feather, which one is going to be more affected by the air. So actually, the heavier the freestyle copter, the smoother the flight that you get, and that's what you want, because essentially these guys are for going to epic locations like abandoned buildings and things and getting great footage out of them and being smooth at the same time. Whereas racing, it doesn't matter really if you're smooth. I mean, it's probably good to be smooth at racing, but it's not as important because the end goal is to be the quickest, not the smoothest. So starting off with the weight, I think the manual says that it's 358 grams. However, I've weighed this one like it is here and it's 368 grams. But I think that's because this is the bind and fly version. So it's come with a XM Plus and it's got the antennas in an unusual position actually on the side there, so I guess we can add some weight for that. And if you put the props on, then it weighs 386 grams, so that is without a battery. So yeah, it's going to be a heavy copter, but we want it to be heavy. And actually, if I compare that to my SkyStars Starlord, which is my current favorite bind and fly, plug and fly freestyle model, that is just over 400 grams. So this one's actually lighter, which doesn't surprise me because we've got this smaller camera up the front. So let's take a look at the specifications. The frame is a stretched X. I tend to prefer a squished X for freestyle just because you get some of the props in the shot with a stretched X, but some people would argue that the stretched X will get some of the airflow from the front props out of the way of the rear, and that is the idea of having it stretched. It also means that even though it's a 5-inch freestyle copter, it will take a 6-inch blade, and I've got some insider info, they are working on a 7-inch arm for this guy. So I think the reason why this guy is a little bit lighter as well is I think the arms are 4mm, so 5mm and even 6mm are being used in freestyle copters, but I can't feel any flex in there whatsoever. And in case you have a problem, this is the box that it comes in. You are given a spare arm, which is just awesome. Yeah, it's a pricey model, this one, although I don't think it's priced too badly, and you get a spare arm with it, so that's pretty cool. We'll take a look at what else you get a bit later. So as you can see, the frame as well, it's got a decal over it, which is really nice. And on the underneath as well, looks like we've got some silicone, and we've got buzz on there as well. And of course you saw the bottle opener that it can be used for. So then if we talk about the motors, they are Emax branded, and I think they are especially for this copter because I couldn't find them anywhere else. They're called the Freestyle, and these ones are a 2306 2400 kV, but this is the 4S version. You can get a 6S version, and I think those are 1700 kV. I'm still a little bit on the fence whether a 6S is beneficial for a freestyle copter. When I tried the Ishin 6S Wizard, I could notice a definite sag still with the battery, and that is the entire point of 6S, is to not get sag. But the freestyle copters are heavier and they are going to draw more amps, therefore you're going to get more battery sag with a heavier copter. So I'm still on the fence with that, but I'll try it for sure. As I say, component wise it's 50-50. I mean, this stack here will take a 6S no problems. So this is the Magnum 2 stack. This time we have got 32-bit 45 amp ESCs, and it says that they're capable of running D-Shot 1200, but I've had a quick look and they're set up as D-Shot 600, so I'll have to double check that. And we also have got the ESC telemetry going to the flight controller. The flight controller is an F4. I think it's based on the Omnibus. It's come flashed with its own special version of Betaflight version 4. It's got Betaflight on-screen display, and you know, this is just going to be a fantastic model. In fact, why am I even reviewing it? Because everything Emax has released since the Baby Hawk R has been fantastic. So there was the Baby Hawk R, and then the Hawk 5, and then the Baby Hawk R Pro, and now this. No, I better do my job, hadn't I? Right, yeah, so we've then got a VTX at the top, which is actually locked out of the box to 25 milliwatt. So I've got the manual here. So yeah, it's locked, and the way that you unlock it is you have got a button on there and you plug the battery in, and when you do that it will say a U. So we've got, you can't quite see it because these battery straps are in the way, but there is a little LED indicator. I wonder if I can show you quickly. Make sure your antenna's on when you do this. Yeah, you can't quite see it through there, but it will say the letter U for unlocked, and then that will go away. And then when it's locked, so if you want to lock it back, then you plug the battery in, press the button down, and it will say AL, and then it will go away. You need to be careful with that because it's a mistake that I made with the Tiny Hawk actually. If you select one of the channels that are not allowed in the CE version, so that's the locked version, for example here would be race band 1 to 3, then you'll just get static through your goggles. So be careful. I did it with the Tiny Hawk. I landed on a channel that was locked, and of course you then have to use the button to get to a channel that's unlocked. So once unlocked, the VTX is power switchable up to 200 milliwatt, and as I mentioned, this is the XM Plus version, which I can just access there, and it's on a 30x30 stack, and we have got a low ESR capacitor just fitting out of the back there to combat any noise issues. The antenna that you are given is a Pagoda, antenna, and it's got the Emax brand on there, but it does have the credit for Martin, and it's also SMA. My only worry is that when you bend it up like that, it could quite easily get knocked, so I think I just need to make sure that it's really tight, maybe get a spanner on there so that it doesn't fall over. There are actually some holes where a cable tie could go through as well. And we've got on the top these very grippy straps, and they have got like a silicone material on there as well. Now in my experience over time that does wear down, but it's pristine at the moment, so I'll have to report over time whether this falls off, but same with the other strap. And then we've also got a silicone mat on the top. Mine's a little bit ski-whiff there, and it's got a little protector over it, so you need to remove that before you put your battery on there, but that's just to stop dust and things getting on it while it's in transit. Same for the pads underneath as well. I guess that is if you want to still bottom mount your battery. If you prefer it like that, then it won't skid on there. Otherwise I can't think what those mats are for. The top plate is really wide, and they are recommending a 4S battery from 1300 milliamp up to 1800 milliamp, but I would suggest not to go lower than 1500, because even on a low pitched prop with these 2306 stator motors, they're going to be drawing a lot of amps. That and the added weight, I think a 1300 would get a lot of battery sag. The camera is branded Emax, but it's actually a Cadex Micro S1, and it's got camera controls hooked up, which is really nice to see. So the flight controller has got its own camera controls pad, so you don't have to mess around with any of the settings. The wire for the XT60 connector is pretty long, and it comes out of the back and goes over the top of the receiver, importantly not the VTX, so we shouldn't experience any noise. Now, it is designed to fit a HD camera on the top here. However, I think if you didn't use something like a TPU mount, then you would get jello with something like a Session 5 or a Hero 7, and I think they are going to be either selling those separately, but they definitely have an STL file, so I'll link that in the below and you can print them off yourself. I think the reason they haven't included that is there are so many different types of camera that they just can't include the correct mount for everybody, so they are providing them separately. The motors have got a hollow shaft and also a naked bottom, and you can't see, but they have got a hex screw underneath, so they would be very easy to get the bell off if it got covered in mud. So we must have a recess in there for that, because those tend to stick out a little bit. There's just a couple of things I want to talk about that are mentioned in the instruction manual, so you get this in the box. We've got Chinese on one side and English on the other side. So I mentioned earlier that it's using ESC telemetry, and that includes the current meter. However, if you go off that figure, then it's bypassing the current draw of the camera, the VTX, your receiver, and the flight controller. So it actually mentions that there is a jumper on the flight controller, and you can change that so that you get the overall current, but that doesn't bother me too much. And there's something interesting here as well. It says in the instructions, VTX power cutoff switch. And what they have done is they have linked up to one of the aux channels through the VTX, and this was a request, I believe, so that if you power on and somebody starts shouting because you're on the same channel, you can flick your aux switch and it'll switch the VTX off. Now I put a question forward to Emax about this, because long-term followers of the channel might remember a model called the B-Fight that did something similar. It didn't turn the VTX off from an aux channel, but what it did was it changed the channel from the aux to. So if you didn't know about that and you'd set up your modes on the aux to, it would also change the channel of your VTX, and of course you don't want that while you're flying. So if with this one you set something up on the aux 4, then it would turn your VTX off. And the other issue that I had with the B-Fight was that if you had a failsafe, then it would also change the channel. But Emax have told me that if you get a failsafe with this one, then it's set to hold, so you won't lose your video. But be aware of that. On the aux 4, it is set to turn off your VTX. So let's take a look at what else you get in the box. We've got the Cadex camera manual, which we don't really need, but it's nice to have. Oh, look at this. What's the best prop? Now that is a good question, isn't it? It looks like you get two different props in this package. So we've got the Avan Flow, which is the prop that came with the Hawk 5, and it says 5 inches, 4.3 pitch, 3 blades. Now what I find is interesting about this prop is that its pitch is actually dynamic in that it changes, so it's got a really high pitch towards the center where the propeller is spinning the slowest, and then as it gets out towards the edge it flattens out where it's spinning the fastest. So yeah, it's an interesting prop that, and it worked very well with the Hawk 5, and it'd be interesting to see how it works with a Freestyle copter. What's it say here? It says designed as a balance of speed, efficiency and flight control, the Flow is a performance prop for pilots looking to maximize their drone. Oh, don't call them drones. And then what's this other prop called? The Avan Scimitar. Is that how you say it? Scimitar? Oh, why'd you have to come up with names that I can't pronounce? So, oh, looks like we've got some Emax stickers there. And is that what we've got in the other side? So, yes, this must be that propeller. So, it says 2.6 pitch. So, yeah, that would be a 5026. Yeah, so that is very low in pitch, and I imagine would make the motor scream a lot more, and you wouldn't have as much power, but maybe it draw less amps. It says designed for flight time and durability. The Scimitar is your fun-bashing prop while offering a smooth flight experience. It says Satumi says, I'm probably butchering all these names, I'm so sorry. Every prop is designed for different reasons. The best prop is the one that suits you best. Try them both. Well, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. How many of those do we get? Oh, those go really deep. So, what have we got here? Oh, that's interesting. So, I think we've got... so we've got 3 of the Scimitar, and then the Flow there, and then it's probably going to be the same this side here. I want to be careful that I don't break them. So what have we got here? Yeah, same again, so 3 of each. So is there anything else left? Oh yeah, the arm, which I talked about already. We've got a strap, so this is going to be for your GoPro, I'd imagine, maybe to go underneath there. And we've got some spare screws, and that is your lot. So one of the reasons for buying into Emax is that they give their models to experienced pilots and set them up in Betaflight so that you don't have to. In fact, it states in the manual that you are not to upgrade the firmware and you are not to change any of the settings. The problem is Betaflight has thrown a spanner into the works because a couple of days ago I started to get this notice. It says you're using an outdated version of the Betaflight configurator, which is version 10.40, and there is a new version 10.51. So I went to the release website, I downloaded and installed the latest configurator. I then plugged the Emax Buzz into the computer and pressed connect, but when I went to the modes tab, everything would lock up, and also the voltage warnings were all set to 0. So I reported this to Emax, and eventually they found that they had the same problem, and they are using a release candidate of Betaflight version 4, and since then it has been released as a proper version, and this version of the configurator, 10.51, is designed to work with the new features of Betaflight 4. So Emax are currently working on a new CLI to combat this issue. At the making of this video, if you flash this model with the latest version of Betaflight, version 4, then this configurator will work, but you'll lose all of their settings, so they're trying to work around that at the moment. And when I have more information on that, I will link to it in the description, because if you've already bought this model, you may run into this same problem. But if you stick with this configurator, which you can go into the version history on GitHub and get this back, which is what I did, then you won't have a problem. But I'm going to close that, and I will show you the Betaflight settings, because everything should be pretty correct. Now the model is showing in a funny position here because that's how I've got it, but we can go into the ports and check out the setup. So we have got the UART1 here for the serial RX, and then we have got the UART3 for the ESC telemetry, and UART6 for the TBS smart audio, so nothing to change there. Then in configuration, it's set up as DShot 600. I'll have to confirm if DShot 1200 works, but they say don't change any of the settings, so I'm going to try not to. We've got the motor idle throttle value at 6%, which is what I usually go with, so I wouldn't change any of that. We've got 8K on the PID loop frequency, and the personalization is buzz, so I'd leave that. The only thing I would change is the maximum arming angle, but it is a risk to do this, so I would set it to 180. Oh, my keyboard's playing up. 180. There we go. That just means that if I land in a tree or something like that, or I'm on a sharp bank, then the model will arm. So if we come down here, everything is set up correctly for FR-Sky and S-Bus. If we come down here, so this is interesting, servo tilt. So this is enabled for the auxiliary channel so that it turns the VTX off, so that's why that's on there, and I'll show you that in a bit. Actually, if I click expert mode, that will give me those options to show you. So we've got air mode, on-screen display, ESC sensor, anti-gravity, dynamic filter all turned on. I would expect all of that there. And then we don't have D-Shot beacon turned on because this model does have a buzzer. So I just need to save and reboot that because I've changed that setting there. And looks like I'm going to have to reconnect to it there. Okay, there we go. Right, so I've gone to power and battery. You can see we've got onboard ADC for voltage meter and then ESC sensor for the current meter. I would just change these to 3. So 3.0 and then 3.0 here as well, just because I don't like the warnings when the battery sags. And then press save. Then in the failsafe settings it's set to drop, so yeah, just make sure that you check that. Of course, take the props off whilst you are doing this. So into the PID menu, and quite interestingly the D value is very high, but it states in the manual not to mess with the PIDs whatsoever, which I find interesting because people are going to be using a variety of different batteries and cameras, and if we go into the different PID profiles there are different figures, but it says don't change any of that. So yeah, just looking at the rates as well, I usually go with 1000 degrees, but for freestyle I guess you want it a bit smoother. We've got a little bit of RC Expo in there as well, and we don't have smart feed forward enabled, but we've got I-term relax and I-term rotation, and TPA set at 0.2. So yeah, I don't think there's anything I would actually change there. Let's check out the filter settings. Yeah, I'm not going to touch any of that. So for the receiver, it's set up as TAER, and that is how my Tyrannus is set up, so I'm going to leave that. And the RSSI is set on the AUX 5, and there's no RC deadband in there. I usually like to stick about 5 in there just so that it is smooth around the center of the sticks. So let's check out the modes. So you could set up your transmitter to match these modes. However, I'm just going to move the sliders. So aux 1 is correct for my arming, but I have angle on the low position rather than the high. I tend not to have horizon mode in there, and then beeper on the aux 3. So yeah, that's how I have it. But you'll notice here that there is no other options for the aux 4, so that's something they've done in the CLI, and it's actually not working with the VTX turning off when they upgrade to the latest version of Betaflight. So that's something that they are working on. It's quite strange because from what I can see, there's only one wire going from the receiver to the actual flight controller, so they've done something internally. They've done some resource remapping, which is why I think they're saying don't upgrade Betaflight, because when you do that, then that wipes out the resource remapping. Anyways, I'm just gonna save that. So if we look in servos here, you'll see there that it's got A4 selected. So yeah, they've remapped one of the pads to a servo. That's why servo was enabled, and then that's how they're turning the VTX off. So let's take a look at the on-screen display here and see what we've got. I would just turn warnings off because I don't like them up on the screen. But we have got the ESC temperature, and we've also got the current meter here, and we've got average battery voltage. I don't like that. I like to have the overall battery voltage. So that is at the top here, and it's also not got the RSSI enabled either, so I would stick that over here somewhere, and I will put the RSSI maybe up here, something like that. Yeah, I think those are the only things I would change. ESC RPM, this is going to be eRPM, so it's not that useful, but you know, the telemetry allows it, so I might as well leave it there. But yeah, you have to convert eRPM to actual RPM by doing some mathematics, because motors have different number of poles and things, so yeah, that's not the actual RPM. You have to do a little bit of calculating to get that. But yeah, I think I'd keep everything else on there. I'd probably have the VTX channel as well, considering it does smart audio. So where's that VTX channel? I probably have that in there somewhere. Oh, it's starting to look cluttered though, isn't it? Yeah, I might play around with that a little bit more to try and make it neater, but yeah, let's save that. And if we go into black box, does have some memory in the data flash, which is usually a sign that they have checked to see that it is flying, or at least everything is in order, so that's always good to see. So I'll just show you in the CLI. If I type in diff, we can see all of the changes that they have made, and if we look up here, so we've got the resources remapped, so this is what is doing the VTX switching, and we've got another few of the other resources changed, so we've got camera controls remapped as well. So if you were to upgrade Betaflight and start messing around, you would have to do this every time and hope that the syntax hasn't changed as well. So again, I think this is why they're saying stick with the version of Betaflight that it comes with. But if the configurator is changing and people don't have this version, then they might run into issues. So they're definitely going to have to address something with that. But yeah, that is the version. You can see Betaflight version 4, but it's a release candidate, and then the target is Omnibus F4. Okay, let's go for a line of sight with this guy. Starting off in angle mode. And so far, it's very quiet. So I'm using a 1500 milliamp GMB battery, That is very quiet indeed. Which is a good thing. So let's see what the punch is like. I think I did hear some slight oscillation then. But it's hard to tell because I can't hear it at all. It's really quiet on these props. That usually means that it's being efficient. It's not helping really that it's a little bit windy today. Well, I don't know. It's hard to tell. I mean, it certainly feels smooth. But what I want to do is just bring it in and just make sure that those motors aren't getting warm, because that's what I'm concerned about. Nah, absolutely stone cold, so maybe it's just my hearing. So I have secured down the antenna at the back. Oh, the sun's coming out. I might actually get to see something. Yeah, secured the antenna down at the back. I think I also forgot to mention that the VTX is using a MMCX connector, which is nice. Better than a micro UFO. So yeah, I'm flying it with the GoPro in place because that's how I'm going to be flying this guy. Which is why it really surprises me that the manual says don't mess around with the PIDs. I guess that is aimed at people who are new, I suppose. But when you start changing the weight of these copters, that's when you have to start changing the PIDs. And if you don't have a GoPro at the front of this thing, then that is going to affect the weight. And if you use a lighter battery, then that's going to affect the weight as well. I'm really impressed with how quiet this thing is on these props though. And there seems to be plenty of power, certainly for Freestyle. It's not going to be the fastest of models, I'm sure, but as I mentioned, Freestyle not really about speed, more about smooth flying. And line of sight, at least, it appears to be doing that. It's really quiet. I bet with those other props it would scream a little bit more with the lower pitch. But so far so good. So let's bring it in for a landing and do some FPV. Okay, so starting off with some DVR footage, and unfortunately the sun has gone in, but the first thing that I noticed is how wide of a field of view is that FPV camera. Now according to the manual it's a 2.1mm lens, but it looks a lot wider than other 2.1mm lenses that I've flown in the past. Looks more like a 1.8 or maybe even a 1.6. Either way, I'm happy because I could see everything nicely. So I'm hearing a little bit of oscillation here. Can you just hear it there? Now, they say not to touch the PIDs, but for me, I think I'll be reducing that D term. So that's like a D term oscillation. And usually you have to go up on the D term when the model is heavy. But I think even with an 1800 milliamp battery, you would still need to turn the D down. But they say not to touch the PID, so maybe they've done some testing and they came to the conclusion that yeah, okay, we're getting some D term oscillation, but it's flying smooth as anything and the motors aren't heating up. And if we look at the ESC temperature, so 27, 28 degrees, that's probably the lowest temperature that I've seen out of these ESCs that are capable of producing that telemetry. So there's a couple of things that I want to clear up. So D-Shot 1200 does work. Not quite sure why that isn't turned on, but there you go. It arms and flies no problem with D-Shot 1200. This isn't flying with D-Shot 1200, I should say. This is D-Shot 600. You'll also notice on the DVR footage that I don't have an RSSI figure, and that is because although it's set up for an AUX 5 on the RSSI, the XM Plus isn't flashed to have the RSSI on any of the AUX channels. So I thought that was a little bit of a shame. That's something they could have put in. But again, this is a very early model, so maybe they will start to do that. There's no audio output on the VTX, so if you require audio, then this one isn't for you. The audio that you are hearing is coming from the GoPro. And I tested out whether the VTX switches off under a failsafe condition, and it doesn't. So yeah, there's no worries there whatsoever. And I wasn't getting any jello through my GoPro, but the sun wasn't out, like I say, so I was a little bit disappointed that the sun didn't come out to play so I could test that. But I'll be taking this guy to plenty of locations. I just printed off the TPU GoPro mount, and it seems to be working fine, and we're getting some nice smooth footage. So it seems like the current meter is accurate. It didn't go above 100 amps, but you can see there it's a 1500 milliamp battery, and we're just over that. So there you go, that is my review of the Emax Buzz. I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get one. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.